This week's word of the week is another word for the word word. So most of the time when we talk about the word word in Koine, we talk about logos. You've all heard that, probably been beaten to death in most of your experiences. But today we're going to look at a different word. Now, if we think back to an episode of Koine Corner about speaking versus saying, or saying versus speaking, we talked about the verb form of logos, which is lego, I say, and laleo, I speak, whereas laleo emphasizes the act of talking. Lego is more about the content of what is being said. Well, similarly, logos as a word can be used in a much more general sense, whereas our word of the day the word of the week today is in greater specificity. So let's get to our word of the week. Here it is. Rhema. Rhema is a word or that which is said, a saying or an expression. In other words, this is a specific thing that someone said. So if we were to take the sayings of Abraham Lincoln, the sayings of Lincoln, in Koine, we could describe that as hoi logoi tu linku, okay? The words of Lincoln. But if we're talking about the Gettysburg Address, right, 7 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, etc., etc., we're talking about very specific content. So the Gettysburg Address is not just the words of Lincoln, they are some words of Lincoln, and they are specific. They're specific in the sense that not everything that Lincoln has said falls into the Gettysburg Address, and he said many things that aren't there, and there are things that he says in the address that he doesn't say elsewhere. We're talking about specificity. So the sayings of Lincoln may be under the blanket of logoi, words, but rhema, our word of the week, is something specific that he said. And that's the key for differentiating between logos and rhema. So rhema is always going to be about something specific. So let's take a look starting out in Matthew chapter 4, verse 4. All the readings today are from the ESV with the Koine supplied. But he answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." And every word here is panti rhemati, not just stuff God says, but every specific word. It's the words that are actually uttered and recorded that he's referring to. Not God talk, right? Not just as a blanket term, but when you add panti, you're saying all of them, every word, but every specific word. So let's carry on, and we'll see it used to refer to a threat. And this is in the book of Acts, chapter 6, verses 13 and 14. This is leading up to the trial of Stephen and the ultimate stoning of Stephen. And they set up false witnesses who said, "This man never ceases to speak words against this holy place and the law, for we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and will change the customs that Moses delivered to us." So, we have heard this man never ceases to speak words, they say. So look at that, lalon rhemata. So lalon is a participle from laleo, speaking, talking, and what is it that he's talking? Rhemata. These are very specific words. How do we know that he's saying that they're very specific words? Because later in the passage, they quote, the false witnesses quote what they're claiming that Stephen said. So they come along and say, "This Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and will change the customs Moses delivered." That's the specific things that the false witnesses claim Stephen is saying, right? Obviously, taken out of context, twisted to be an accusation against him. Let's carry on and take a look at Paul in Romans chapter 10, verse 17. So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. Now, the word of Christ here, hermeneutics, Christou, the word of Christ. I want you to notice something important here. Hermeneutics, this is in the genitive case, because it's in a genitive phrase, word of Christ, and it's singular, it's not plural. Not the words of Christ, but he says the word of Christ. Not the logos of Christ, but the hermeneutics of Christ. Why? Because he's talking about a specific body of teaching. Paul would say the kerygma, the whole story about Jesus proclaimed in its totality so that he's understood as who he is. So if you think, depending on your background and your history, you may belong to some sort of a denomination that recites a particular creed, let's say. So if you repeat the Apostles' Creed, etc., you are testifying testifying hermeneutics, a word about him. Even though it's a whole text, right? The entire creed is a whole text. It's a specific body of teaching, of doctrine, the kerygma, the thing that we proclaim about Christ. That's what Paul is saying here in Romans 10:17. It would not have the same power if it was logos. That's the message about Christ, and that kind of leaves open to the notion of what needs to be included and what doesn't need to be included. Whereas the hermeneutics of Christ, the kerygma, the body of teaching about Christ as Messiah, has indispensable and essential elements that are part of that teaching. All right. So there's, again, to highlight, hermeneutics from herma is talking about specifics. Let's carry on and take a look at Matthew 12, 36 and 37. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word, pan herma, every word, and then careless, the adjective is there, they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. So notice, pan herma, every word, every specific thing that you've said is going to be called to account. Ton logon su, the words of you, your words, by your words you'll be justified, and by your words you'll be condemned. So he says, we can break out all of your speech, all of your words, and what's going to happen is they're going to condemn you or they're going to justify you. The specifics of those words, pan herma, all those words, the specificity of what you've said will determine whether it is justifying, if it leads towards justification or towards condemnation. So it's pretty clear that when you take the individual words that a person has said and put them under the blanket of everything that they've said, the specifics of the words will dictate whether those are justifying or condemning, right? So pretty interesting stuff. Now, if you're looking for homework, there's a couple more. Take a look at Luke chapter 24, verse 11, and look at the report of the women who are at the empty tomb and had the angel testify to them. They go and find the disciples, and they tell the disciples what they've seen and heard. And the disciples, we're told, are not able to accept their report. And the report there is herma. The word, the things that they're saying, the exact things that they're saying, they're having a hard time with. The next one is Mark chapter 9, verse 32, where Jesus makes the statement that they use against Stephen about tear down this body, you tear down this temple, 3 days I'll raise it up. And he talks about his own death and resurrection, and it's described as his rhema about that, his specific message about that. So rhema is a word, it's another word for the word, apart from logos, in that it always is talking about specific content, not just that it's stuff that a specific person said, but the content in specificity. Martin Luther King Jr. said many things and is famous for a great many speeches, and we would call that his words, logoi, but if we were talking about the I have a dream speech, that would be rhema, the specific word from Martin Luther King on that given day on that topic. That's the difference between the two. A great word for the word, rhema. Till next time, Kar Sky Rena Humin, grace and peace to you.